Right, guys, good evening and welcome to lecture 3. Hope you're well. And we're going to start. This shouldn't be a long lecture, but also quite packed with information and so on. So I hope you will enjoy it, enjoy the lecture tonight. So I'll begin. Ooh, let me just get rid of that. Again. All right. All right, gladiators and beast hunts was something that was very prevalent in the Roman culture and something that Paul drew from in order to speak into a deeper spiritual truth. As with everything else, Paul kept on seeing things that were happening that were important to the Romans in order to speak to his audience, which were Roman, Greek, Jew. So again, he's going to look at that and see, okay, how is that going to speak into any spiritual truth? And in this lecture, we're going to try and unpack it for us. Now, the Roman crowd was like a WWF crowd. And I'm not talking about wildlife here, but I'm talking about the WWF, the punching part of it. What they wanted was a public spectacle that grabbed the hearts, and essentially that was bloodletting that went on with the gladiators. Now, they are not just for fun of watching two guys slog away at each other. The whole point of this kind of entertainment was to bring back the patriotism of the Roman people, a connection to the past of the Roman Empire, the Roman people, the Roman history. So spectacles were designed to help people remember great moments of Roman history. And often the gladiators' spectacle was predetermined. That's why I use WWF as well. It was already known what the script was. Why? Well, because the Romans have to win. That's the story. You're not going to tell a story that is going to depict you losing. So obviously, every story you tell, every production you put together has to show that you win. So the last thing you want to do is to be on the not Romans team of the gladiators or whatever was put on show. What's important is there is a second thing, though. There's a benefaction that's involved in this. Okay, the Eurorgism. This is what the idea that people who wanted to join government sponsored your game. Nothing changed. Hey, I mean, look what's happening at the moment in America with the election and this actor and this sports personality sponsoring. Now, they don't only sponsor your games, they sponsor a whole range of activities. These are all called Komoda. Komodas are sponsorship of entertainment. And let me just let someone else in. And convenience, we get the word, this is where we get a comodata from this, okay? We also get commoda as in toilets from this word. Why? Because when you had the convenience, you didn't have to get the chamber pot and carry it out. You had a commoda. That was very important. But a commoda was something that politicians were regularly sponsoring these kind of things. The idea here was that if you were going to a public servant before you got elected, you actually put money out of your pocket to provide something to the public to show that that's kind of a guy that you are. And because of that, we could then count on you to be a person who's going to give us public service. Now, what's interesting about that is that in the Res Gestia Davidi Augusti, when Augustus writes, why I am a really good guy, one of the things that he wrote was, I put great amounts of money into spectacles and Komodo for the populace. He wanted you to remember, I'm a good guy. Not only did I put money into the spectacles, but I made sure that you were comfortable. I made sure that there were a lot of Komodos there, a lot of toilets for you there. So remember me, I'm a nice guy. Now, they don't only do that, they also give cash handouts at spectacles, donations for public banquets, provision of baths. Listen, they even sponsored your toilet use, okay? The public toilets now, urinals were on corners, but if you had to, to do the other stuff, you went into a public restroom. And when you went in, they would say something like, today's restrooms are sponsored by Lichai the Jew. Lichai the Jew, he is the one you need, vote Lichai, okay? If guys who go to urinals at shopping centers, you stand there, do your thing, and if you look in front of you, there's some kind of an advert. So in those days, instead of an advert, while you do your thing, there would be this thing about the guy who sponsored the urinal that you see in front of. Okay, so you get the picture. It was to really get people to vote for this nice guy that has put together all this spectacle that you are watching. Again, not much has changed, hey? So gladiatorial context and chariot racing, these are all things that were actually sponsored. Now, a sponsor is called an editor. And what I want you to see is that the editor actually come together and they are going to put together the gladiatorial contest in 3 parts. But the editor work is quite a complex work. Month before the event is arranged for, let's say, an amphitheater game, they have to actually put together all of the cards of what they want to accomplish. Now, your daily games came in 3 stages. The earliest stage is the beast hunt. The venation or beast hunts are planned hunts where the animals are brought in and hunters are brought in, and actually the stage props down in the arena. That's the word for the arena. That's the word for the sand, where the sand was done. At the bottom on the arena is movable props, and the animals can actually come up from underneath or alongside during the hunt. And so this is all exciting, especially if you know somebody gets ripped into pieces or whatever. And then at midday, kind of to balance out the card a little bit, we put on some public execution because we have to do it some way. And there's a lot of blood already here, and it's just practical to do it. That's the way they would think about those things in those days. And then afternoon, because after you've had a good lunch, what you need to see are some guys slogging away at each other as gladiators. Now, I want you to think about the editor's work and the planning that is involved here, because first, you have to acquire venue. But long before you do that, you have to get yourself the animal. And animals take months and months and months to secure. There was actually a record that was pulled out of someone who was asking for wild animals 18 months before the event. And you need to have different kind of animals, and depending upon where your event venue is, it will determine your animal. The hunts are coordinated with a different team than the lewd or the competitive teams of the gladiators. So you have to actually employ several different groups of people, and they're working on different parts of your big production. So a lot is going into that. Now, different venues again will require different animals. So if you are at Flavian Amphitheater or the Colosseum, as we would call it, they have along the barrier up and upper fence, which means they can have lions and tigers. But in like Pompeii, there's no little fence. Nobody wants to put on something and watch the spectator get eaten, especially if you are the lowest tier. which is normally your wealthiest people. So it's not it's not a good move for your career. It's also not a good move for them to attend. So Professor Tuck at Miami University, who is quite a leading professor with regards to theater and the sports and very much the Roman life at that time. He says, so what you are left with are the three B's: bears, boars, and bulls. So in an amphitheater that you don't have the upper fence, you have a specific kind of animal that you can bring. So again, a lot of thought comes into that, a lot of money, a lot of organization comes into it. Now, beyond the animals, the second thing you have to do is you're going to have to acquire venue. And that's not all that easy. The editor wants a certain kind of a set of games, okay, or game. So he's going to go to the local ediles. Ediles are like the city magistrate or the city manager, and he's going to negotiate a cost because he needs not only the amphitheater, he needs the stand to open for food. He needs the gladiator practice arena that's next to it, what is called the palestra. He is going to need the palestra, and he might even need some awning. It's a daytime event, and in Italy, the sun is very, very hot. So as a result, you're going to want to have a whole little bunch of retired sailors that can follow a drum beat going up and down, then move the horning from one side to another to the drum beat, that you can keep the shade on your people because they don't want to come if they are not going to sit without awning. Okay, the next thing you're going to have to do is go out and get yourself some advertising. So you got to get an ad campaign going. And what's wonderful is that we actually have these from excavation. In Pompeii, for example, and in Herculaneum, on the side of the building, the Pinti, which are more related to who to vote for, and these billboards that are plastered up there, and the editors are paying people to paint them. And you can see just a sample, a picture of what was excavated on one of the walls on Pompeii and the stadium in Pompeii. This one that we're looking at is from Aemilia Sylla, and it's great. It's found in Pompeii, and it reads like this: 20 pairs of gladiators of Domitius, Lucretius, Satrius, Valens, perpetual Flaming of Nero Caesar, son of Augustus, and 10 pairs of gladiators of his son Domitius, Lucretius, Valens, will fight at Pompeii from the 8th through to the 12th of April. So basically an advertising billboard that was excavated, and that's why we have this kind of information. Now, the title of the rules dates that particular piece of painting or that particular piece of advertising that was found, that we have it from the time of Gladius, during the time of Paul's second missionary journey. So that particular finding is actually important for us as Christians, because we know in the time of Gladius, Paul was now on his second missionary journey. So what I love is the inscription continues, and the inscription would say, okay, not in that picture, but find others and sort of put it together. But it will carry on. It will say, it will be a fight with wild beasts according to normal standard, and awning will be used. But in addition to that, especially amusing to me are the last two lines. This is what it says: Aemilia Sylla painted this alone by moonlight. Okay. Why put that information? Who knows? But you might be advertising for someone else. But if you can get a plug-in for your own ad team, why not put it on there somewhere, right? So you could even see a good advertising campaign going on there, and the name of the advertising company is right there alongside this billboard. Now, outside the walls of Pompeii, when you walk around, all over the walls of tombs, these advertisers who would not put anything on a tomb, but people from out of town will come and advertise their events on your tomb. Why? Because the best tombs are right outside the city wall. And everyone who's going to come into the city for a particular event, everyone is going to see them. They were put there to honor the dead, but a little advertising, how bad can that be? These people are dead already. They're not going to complain, right? So you'd find that Calinium, Cumia, Petala, Nucria, Stabia, all these people, we find these little ads for the games in the city outside Pompeii, and they were their competitors' ads. They were their competitors. So ads are big things, and these adverts on the tombs will also find in excavations, and that's why we are able to say that. Now you're also going to have to get yourself some gladiators, because you can't have a gladiatorial contest without gladiators, right? So you go to the Lute. That's like the magistrate. That is a training center for competitors. And remember, ads that are read to you. If they were going to have 30 pairs competing over 5 days, that suggests 6 pairs a day, and that indicates that these are really, really expensive games, because if a gladiator is killed, the sponsorer, the editor, has to pay the bill for what the guy who owes the gladiators lost. If he is wounded and requires medical care, yes, he pays the bill. The editor does. And so, by the way, if the crowd goes nuts and says, free the man, which sometimes would happen, he has to buy the man on the spot at the crowd's rate. So this thing can be incredibly expensive. And that's why in the 2nd century, Marcus Aurelius actually put a cap on it. He said, you can't spend more than this, even if the crowd goes absolutely bonkers. And that's what they're demanding. This is how much you pay. Because you can imagine it was probably going completely out of order. So you had animals. Now you got your venue. Now you got your ads. And now you got your competitors. But you're also going to have your gifts. The important thing about your gifts or your sparsinos are there's got to be free beer tickets to throw to the crowds. You're not going to do this or do all of this and put all of this into it without free beer. Free beer, and these guys will walk along with tickets. Now, in the excavation again of an amphitheater, they found dozens of these little tickets. And it's funny because they actually often are stamped. The other big one is free bread, 1 Roman pound bread loaf. And so you could go out to the vendors and you got your tickets for free ones, free beer, and free bread that were now thrown out at you. Now, when it comes to the gladiators, there's no doubt in my mind that Paul was not a big fan of this unacceptable pagan loss of life. But the symbolism that was involved in it was worship pagan gods. There was careless treatment of the Creator's gift of life. So I'm sure that Paul's not for this, okay? And the growing prospect is that these guys are getting good at this, and Christians are being persecuted, and persecution is on the rise. Put 1 and 1 together and you get 2. And I think Paul really discreet, but Paul's a man on a mission, and he's focused on the communication and communicating his instruction and his encouragement in a very specific way. So how does this ties together. And so he's going to use language that comes from this that every Roman could easily understand. And it's interesting that he knew what a crowd of victory meant to people. He knew what achievements were, and he knew the hunger of the gold medalist, if you will. And in Paul's teaching to the Corinthians at Corinth on the subject of a believer's coming resurrection, he talks about this. He says, I can't carry out my mission if I'm threatened constantly under the circumstances prevailing in my day. Talking about the persecution, talking about the gladiators, talking about some Christians that are being brought to be eaten by the animals. So he writes this in 1 Corinthians 15, and he says this, why are we also in danger every hour? Our firm brothers and sisters, by the boasting in you, which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord, that I die daily. If from human motives I fought with wild beasts, listen to this language, at Ephesus, what good is it to me? If the dead are not raised, let's eat and drink, for we die tomorrow. I want you to think about that for a moment. How a gladiator combatant looked at a life. Okay? And what's important to me is being constantly handed over to death. Isn't that a great description of what was going on in the life of not only the gladiators, but the apostles during the rise of the persecution? I mean, you didn't know when you were going to be arrested for declaring the gospel. You didn't know when you were going to be next. When you got caught, you didn't know what kind of persecution and what kind of a sentence you were going to get. And what's interesting to me is when you really look at what he's saying, and let me read it to you, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. The time of my departure has come. I fought, again, listen to the language. I fought the good fight. I finished the course or finished the race. I've kept the faith. And you hear this imagery of a race course, but that's not the only imagery you hear, because most races live a whole life and don't die. That's not true of the percentage of gladiators who were contestants, because a horse racer or chariot racers, as we spoke before, they might die, they might get injured if they don't take that corner properly and all that kind of stuff. But when it came to being a gladiator, the chances were much higher. He returns to the image of a fight, and he comes back to it over and over and over, and he lets them know, the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. He mentioned in the very last of his letters, he says, so that through me, the proclamation might be fully accomplished, and that all the Gentiles might hear that I was rescued out of the lion's mouth. Again, listen to the language. Where do you suppose he's getting the imagery from? Paul felt his work marked his life, and he was learning to yield everything, to give up your children, to give up your nation, to give up your aspiration of freedom and prosperity. Paul is giving everything up for the gospel. And he writes, are you guys still there? Extremely quiet on the other side. You all still all right there, eh? Okay, I'm going to take it that you guys are still with me.
Still here, thank you.
Ah, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, proof of life on the other side.
We're still here, Lachai. We're still here.
Okay, great. Let's carry on. We almost finished. And he's writing to Timothy, and he says, I know my assignment is swiftly coming to an end. And he's there and he's ready. He says, that's it. I'm ready to be offered. I'm ready to to I've run it. Listen to compound its words again. I take you now to Claudius 41:54, and Claudius comes out and he's watching what was called a Numatia. Numatia was a large lake that was made with a bunch of Roman boats that were going to show us how Roman won the war in the past. And it's a big theater production on water. And now Claudius shows up, but when he's got there, he kind of confused everyone because they turned around and they say to him, Ava imperator maritorio te salute, hail emperor, we who are about to die salute you. And Claudius mutters, or maybe not, okay? Or maybe you're not going to die, which confused them. And I thought he meant hey, we're off the hook. So they abandoned the ship, and he had to actually get the people to put the boys back on the boat and said, no, he was only kidding. Listen, when presidents speak, market moves. When Caesar speaks, the army jumps ship. And so in the middle of all of that, what we have is this little moment. And then, of course, I love the way the ancient historian says, and they all got on their ship and continued with the process of dying well. I mean, really, that's not a thought I've ever thought someone will say is I died well. I kind of was hoping to skip out on the experience if I could go to the cloud. So here's the bottom line, okay? Paul declares the time of his departure was at hand. Somehow he knew it was going to come to an end. And he said, I'm not going to abandon the thing. I'm not going to jump ship. Excuse me, I'm not going to jump ship. I have confidence. I want you to listen again to what he says to Tim. And he's on his way out. And he says, the Lord stood with me. The Lord strengthened me. I was rescued out of a lion's mouth. I wonder if when he was penning 2 Timothy 4, that he wasn't actually thinking about those who were facing those kinds of penalties. And here's what Paul knew. And listen to me very carefully. Here's what Paul knew. And it took him a lifetime to figure it out. And I'm still working on trying to figure it out in my own life. No man can take your life from you when you already have given it to Jesus Christ. They can only take it when you are still holding on to it. And that, people, was the lesson of Paul as he writes and as he thinks about these guys that their lives was taken from them for absolutely nothing. So, guys, there's a lecture. As I said, it was a short lecture, a lot of stuff in there. And lecture 4 next week, we're going to look at the Roman bathhouse, where essential features of daily life across the Roman Empire. Ironically, the primary purpose wasn't hygiene, but for serving as a social hub where people from all walks of life could relax, socialize, conduct business, and unfortunately engage in various activities like eating, drinking, exercising, playing games, attending to lectures, or even having sensual interactions. Due to the popularity of these places, Apostle Paul draws again from the bathhouse imagery to urge Christians to rid themselves of the old sinful habits, much like shedding our old clothes. By the end of this teaching, you'll be challenged to align your habits with the new hearts and status that Jesus has given us. So there you go, guys. Lecture number 3 is finished. Any questions?
Thank you, Lachai. That was quite illuminating.
You're welcome.
You led us out to the pathway and then you showed us the valley at the end.
Yes. And hopefully the mountaintop is in sight. All right, guys.
Thank-
Have a good night.
Thanks, Nathai.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Thanks,
Nathai.
Nathai. Yes,
You're welcome.
Stu.
Thank you.
And yeah,
Alright.
look out
Thank
for the
you.
recording.
Thank you. Good night.
Look out for the recording and look out for the notes to come tomorrow.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.